Despicable fake tears at Bondi Beach, using a terrorist atrocity to sell her shitty clothing. On stage at the not sold out Her Best Life retreat. On stage at the not sold out Her Best Life retreat for just 122 minutes before deciding to be booed.
So, horrific stories that no one should ever really experience. Let me introduce you. Thanks, Jessica.
Yeah. How's your daughter doing now? My daughter, she's...
There are stories that the mainstream media will cover, and there are stories that the mainstream media will shape. The difference between those two things is exactly what this report is about, because what happened during Harry and Meghan's Australia tour was covered extensively in Australian newspapers, in British tabloids, in American entertainment outlets. But what was covered and what actually happened are two very different things. The mainstream media will not give you the full picture of what happened during Harry and Meghan's Australia tour. They will hand you a carefully curated version, polished and sanitized.
Was just like, what? But I want to show you part of the footage he sent me, because this is the first moment where the crowds...
Designed to protect a narrative that has been crumbling in real time. What actually happened over those 4 days was something else entirely. It was a masterclass in cynical image management that crossed lines most public figures would never dare approach. And it started at Bondi Beach. Let us begin with what Meghan Markle did at Bondi Beach, because it needs to be stated plainly and without any diplomatic cushioning. The Bondi Beach attack was a real tragedy. 6 people were killed and many more were injured in a horrific stabbing carried out at one of Australia's most beloved public spaces. Families were shattered. A community was traumatized. And Meghan Markle showed up with cameras rolling, tears appearing on cue, and outfits that were later listed for sale on her merchandise platform. That is not a mischaracterization. That is exactly what happened. The tears themselves became a story of their own. Video footage from her appearance at the memorial site circulated widely online. What observers noticed was not grief. What they noticed was performance. The kind of controlled, deliberate emotional display that trained actors produce on demand. And the comparison to acting was not made by fringe critics or anonymous accounts. It was made directly and openly by commentators who have followed Meghan's public appearances for years. 1 tear, left eye, delivered on a 3-second countdown. That is what the footage suggested to tens of thousands of viewers who watched it on repeat. Tom Sykes, a journalist who by most assessments has been relatively fair in his coverage of the Sussex family, was so disturbed by what he witnessed that he addressed it directly on his Substack, The Royalist. He wrote that Meghan had turned a massacre site into an online shopping mall. He said it should not need saying, but when you are meeting people affected by an anti-Semitic mass shooting, profiting from the event is a revolting dereliction of duty. He was careful to add that he was speaking not about royal obligations, but about basic human decency. Selling the clothes off your back at the site of a massacre where 15 people died is not a complicated ethical question. It has a clear answer, and Meghan Markle chose the wrong one. What made it worse was the pattern. This was not an isolated lapse in judgment. Earlier in the same week, the clothes she wore while visiting a children's cancer hospital were posted to her merchandise platform before she had even changed out of them. She then attended a veterans arts event, changed into a second outfit, and that ensemble was listed online as well. The commercialization of every single public appearance, including appearances at hospitals and memorial sites, was not accidental. It was systematic. It was the business model operating in plain sight. The late Queen Elizabeth II warned Harry and Meghan about exactly this. She told them, with the kind of clarity that only comes from decades of institutional wisdom, that combining a life of royal service with a life of commercial profit was not sustainable, not appropriate, and ultimately destructive to both. They ignored her, and what we are now witnessing is the consequence of that decision playing out on an international stage, in real time, in front of audiences that are increasingly unwilling to pretend they do not see what is right in front of them. There's a reason the Queen was so insistent on that boundary. The moment a royal engagement becomes a commercial opportunity, the people being visited stop being the point. They become the backdrop. They become the set dressing, the sick child in the hospital bed, the grieving family at the memorial, the veteran at the arts event. All of them are transformed from human beings deserving of genuine attention into props for a content strategy. That is what has happened. That is what observers have been watching happen. And the footage does not lie. Now let us talk about the Her Best Life retreat, because this was the commercial centerpiece of the entire tour, and it collapsed in a way that was both predictable and genuinely embarrassing. Tickets were priced at thousands of dollars per person. The venue was the Intercontinental Bondi Beach Hotel, a location that at the time of the event had not yet finished its ballroom. The event was sold to fans as an intimate, transformative experience with Meghan Markle. What those fans actually received was 122 minutes of her time before she decided that attending a rugby match with Harry was a higher priority. 122 minutes for thousands of dollars at an unfinished hotel, after tickets had failed to sell out despite public claims to the contrary from the Sussex camp. The people inside that room had paid a significant amount of money for a significant amount of access. What they got was the bare minimum before Meghan walked out the door. And the person sitting next to Meghan on stage was Gemma, co-host of the Jackie O Show, who at the time was navigating her own very public difficulties with the Australian tax authorities. The optics were, to put it generously, not ideal. What the retreat revealed was something that many observers have been saying for years. Meghan Markle does not particularly care about the people who support her. The retreat was not designed for the women who attended it. It was designed to generate content, to produce photographs, and to extract money from people willing to pay a premium for proximity to a name that still carries some residual shine. The moment those functions had been served, even partially, the motivation to stay evaporated. And so she left. She left people who had spent thousands of dollars, who had traveled potentially significant distances, who had organized their lives around this event, and she went to a rugby match. That tells you something about the values driving this operation. It tells you something about what the people who paid for those tickets actually represented to the woman they had paid to spend time with. They were a revenue source. Once the revenue had been extracted, the relationship was over. At the rugby match itself, the reception was telling. Harry and Meghan appeared on the big screen inside the stadium. The response from the crowd was not the enthusiastic welcome that a successful royal tour might generate. What observers inside the ground reported was a combination of scattered booing and, more significantly, silence. Not hostility exactly, but indifference. The kind of blank, unimpressed response that is in some ways more damaging than open disapproval. They tried to compensate. There were waves to the crowd that appeared calculated rather than spontaneous. There was a public display of affection that, to those watching, looked staged rather than genuine. The cameras were rolling. The couple knew it, and it showed. Meghan's walk around Sydney's beaches that morning had been attended by approximately 9 people, including Marcus Anderson, the global membership director of Soho House, whose name keeps appearing in the margins of this story wherever Meghan goes. His presence on the beach walk suggested, as many had expected, that Soho House had some level of involvement in the logistics or networking dimensions of this Australian trip. Anderson's connection to Meghan goes back years, to her suits era in Toronto, and his fingerprints have appeared repeatedly at significant moments in her social and professional trajectory. The broader question of the crowds throughout this tour deserves serious examination, because the Australian mainstream media presented a picture of enthusiastic public reception that does not hold up when you look at the footage carefully. Bondi Beach, for instance, is one of the most visited tourist destinations in the entire country. The people who happened to be there on the day of Meghan's visit were not, by and large, fans who had turned up specifically to see her. They were tourists and locals who were there anyway, going about their day, who found themselves in proximity to a media event. The footage of those interactions tells a very different story from the one being packaged and sold by sympathetic outlets. The interaction Meghan had with children during the Invictus-related engagements also attracted significant attention from observers who study her public behavior closely. A former teacher watching the footage described what she saw in precise terms. Meghan, she said, deliberately avoids eye contact with children when she has decided the interaction is over, using that break in eye contact as a signal to the child that they are being dismissed, even when the child is still trying to engage. This is not an isolated observation. It is a pattern that has been noted at multiple public appearances over multiple years. Children, who have no understanding of what a photo opportunity is or why an adult would suddenly disengage from them mid-interaction, respond to that dismissal with visible confusion. It is uncomfortable to watch. It is more uncomfortable to consider what it reveals. The hospital visit earlier in the tour generated its own controversy that had not fully resolved by the time the Bondi Beach visit compounded the outrage. The decision to merchandise outfits worn during visits to sick children was described by critics across the political spectrum as exploitative, And it is worth noting that this criticism did not come exclusively from conservative commentators or royal loyalists. Trevor Phillips and Meghan Kelly, who approach most issues from very different perspectives, found common ground in their condemnation of the behavior on display during this tour. When people who agree on almost nothing agree on something, it is usually worth paying attention. The question of what King Charles should do about all of this has become increasingly urgent inside British royal circles. Reporting from the Daily Mail, sourced from individuals connected to Buckingham Palace, indicates that while there is definite irritation within the institution about the Australian tour, there are no active conversations about stripping Harry and Meghan of their titles or removing Harry from the line of succession. The palace's stated reasoning is that any move toward what insiders are calling defenestration would simply add to the Sussex sense of grievance and give them another chapter for another book or another documentary. The institution's preferred posture, apparently, is to roll with the punches. That posture is not sitting well with everyone. A source previously close to the late Queen Elizabeth II was unambiguous on the matter. Without speculating on what Her Majesty would have thought about the specifics of the Australian tour, this source said with complete certainty that this is exactly the outcome she worked to prevent. Those are careful words. They are also devastating ones. The woman who spent 7 decades navigating the intersection of duty, dignity, and public expectation tried to build guardrails that would stop precisely this from happening. Those guardrails were dismantled, and here we are. And the people who dismantled them are now in Australia, selling outfits worn at massacre sites, leaving paying fans after 122 minutes, and receiving standing ovations from a press corps that has decided the real story is too uncomfortable to tell. The late Queen understood something about public life that her grandson and his wife have either never grasped or have chosen to ignore, that the dignity of service is not incidental to its power. It is the source of its power. The moment service becomes commerce, the dignity evaporates. And without the dignity, what remains is just a brand with a crown on it. From inside the camp of Prince William and Catherine, the concern is equally pointed. A friend of the couple told reporters that in their view, young cancer patients can end up looking like props designed to help the Sussexes generate commercial revenue. They described this as extremely dangerous for the monarchy. The core argument is simple, and it should not need elaboration. The public needs to be able to trust that royals undertaking engagements, particularly with vulnerable populations, are doing so out of genuine duty rather than to provide window dressing for a commercially driven foreign tour. The moment that trust is broken, the entire relationship between the institution and the people it serves is damaged. Richard Eden of the Daily Mail has been reporting on what he describes as Operation Thor, an establishment-level effort that reportedly includes figures like former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, aimed at creating conditions under which Harry and Meghan might return to the United Kingdom on a more permanent basis in some kind of revised royal role. The reporting suggests that what appeared to be a small, private commercial trip gradually expanded into something resembling an unofficial royal tour, complete with hospital visits, public engagements, and all the trappings of formal royal representation. The Daily Telegraph noted that what began as a limited private visit ended up looking remarkably like what the Sussexes described in their 2020 statement after the Sandringham Summit, a progressive new role within the institution combined with financial independence. That framing, if accurate, should alarm anyone who values the integrity of the institution, because what the Australian tour demonstrated, with uncomfortable clarity, is that Meghan Markle has found a way to access the symbolic power of royal status while simultaneously monetizing every single engagement it enables. The title of Duchess of Sussex opens doors. It gets you into hospitals. It gets you onto memorial sites. It gets you in front of grieving families and sick children and war veterans. And then the outfits worn at those locations go up for sale. That is the model, and it is operating at a scale and with a brazenness that is genuinely without precedent. The criticism of this model has not been limited to royal commentators or British media. Hollywood, according to observers who track the entertainment industry's relationship with the Sussex brand, is watching this tour with clear eyes. The entertainment world has seen enough of Meghan's approach to recognize what is happening. Actress Justine Bateman publicly described Meghan as a disaster tourist. That phrase, precise and unsparing, captures something that thousands of people watching the footage had felt, but perhaps not yet articulated. A disaster tourist is someone who travels to sites of tragedy not to grieve, not to serve, not to help, but to be photographed there, to absorb the emotional weight of the location and redirect it toward their own brand. That is what the Bondi Beach visit looked like to the people who watched it with unclouded eyes. And here's the connection that cannot be ignored when thinking about the Bondi Beach visit specifically. When Harry and Meghan were in Jordan, they visited an organization that has been connected to individuals with direct links to Palestinian terrorist groups. For Meghan Markle, given that documented association, to then show up at the site of an anti-Semitic Islamist terror attack and perform visible grief for the cameras is not merely tone deaf. It is something far more troubling. It is a contradiction so stark that it demands acknowledgement. And the mainstream media, both in Australia and internationally, has largely chosen not to acknowledge it. The Australian mainstream media's coverage of this tour has been, in the view of many observers, an embarrassment. The narrative pushed by local outlets of enthusiastic crowds and successful engagements and a warm public reception was contradicted repeatedly by footage that told a different story. Sparse crowds, indifferent bystanders, a retreat that did not sell out, a stadium that booed, an interaction with a child that made a former teacher uncomfortable enough to describe it in clinical detail. None of that made it into the headline narrative that Australian outlets were constructing in real time. There is a growing body of evidence that the institutional infrastructure enabling this tour, the hospital access, the official-looking engagements, the royal-adjacent framing, did not simply materialize on its own. Someone arranged it. Someone made calls. Someone opened doors that are not typically open to private citizens, even wealthy and famous ones. The suggestion that elements of the British establishment, possibly including individuals operating with the knowledge or tacit approval of the palace, have been facilitating the Sussex commercial operation is one that serious journalists are now taking seriously. It is no longer a fringe theory. It is a reported story appearing in mainstream British outlets with named sources. What this tour exposed, in the end, is the gap between the image and the reality. The image is a woman of compassion and service, moved to tears by human suffering, dedicating her platform to the people who need it most. The reality, as documented by footage, by first-hand accounts, by merchandise listings that went live while memorial candles were still burning, is something considerably less flattering. It is a commercial operation using the language and aesthetics of royal service as its primary marketing tool. And the people being used to fuel that operation, the sick children, the grieving families, the veterans, the fans who spent thousands of dollars for 122 minutes, are the ones paying the price. Prince William and Catherine, by all available reporting, understand what is happening and find it neither sustainable nor appropriate. They are the future of the monarchy, and the monarchy they inherit will have to reckon with the precedent being set right now. In Australia, one merchandise listing at a time, because the question of what the title Duchess of Sussex is actually worth, and who it is serving, is not going away. It is getting louder. And eventually, someone with the authority to answer it is going to have to do exactly that. The fallout from this tour is not finished. An investigation has been opened into the hospital visit. Critics from across the political and media spectrum continue to add their voices to the condemnation. The Australian mainstream press is beginning to face questions about why its coverage was so disconnected from the footage its own cameras captured. And the palace continues to do what the palace has always done when confronted with a problem it would rather not solve. It waits. It rolls with the punches. It hopes the news cycle moves on. But the people asking the questions are not waiting. They are not rolling with punches. And they are not moving on. There is a community of journalists, researchers, and independent commentators who have been documenting this story with precision and patience for years. They have the receipts. They have the footage. They have the named sources. And every tour like this one, every merchandise listing tied to a hospital visit, every 122-minute retreat, every stage kiss at a rugby match, adds to that documentation. The case builds itself. All it needs is time. But this particular news cycle has a way of not moving on, because every time a new engagement is announced, every time a new outfit appears for sale, every time a new memorial site is visited with cameras rolling, the questions come back. They come back louder. They come back with more documentation, and the silence from the institution that could end this with a single decision becomes, each time, more difficult to explain. King Charles has a choice in front of him. It is not a comfortable choice. It is not a politically convenient choice, but it is a choice, and the longer he delays making it, the more the institution he leads absorbs the cost of that delay. Every day that the title Duchess of Sussex is used to open a hospital door so that the outfit worn inside can be listed for sale afterward is a day that cost is compounding. The late Queen knew this. Her friends are saying it. William and Catherine believe it. The only person in a position to act on it continues to choose not to. The real story of the Australia tour is not the one the mainstream media told you. It is the one the footage shows. It is the one the receipts confirm. It is the one the grieving families at Bondi Beach deserve to have told honestly, by journalists with the courage to tell it. And it is the one that, slowly and inevitably, is making its way into the record. Whatever comes next, that record is going to matter, because records have a way of outlasting narratives. Narratives require constant maintenance, constant management, constant pressure applied to the people who might otherwise tell the truth. Records simply sit there, waiting for the moment when enough people are ready to read them clearly. That moment for this story is arriving, and no amount of carefully staged airport arrivals or choreographed emotional displays at memorial sites is going to stop it.